Death of a Cheerleader, also known as A Friend to Die For, is a 1994 film directed by William A. Graham. It's written by Dan Bronson, and it's based on the article Death of a Cheerleader by Randall Sullivan. I haven't read the article, but I am familiar with the story. It's loosely based on, we are told at the beginning, with text on screen, that the location's fiction. I think that's when they told us the location's fiction. The characters are given different names, so it's not an accurate representation of the true story in that regard, but it is based on the murder of Kirsten Costas, who was murdered by a schoolmate. And I don't want to go into too much detail about that, or indeed this film. I don't want to give away too much, but the basic premise is about a cheerleader being murdered and by a classmate, a peer. And I think the film is definitely, to an extent, more aimed at a teenage audience. Now, I say that in a way that sounds obvious. The protagonists are largely all teenagers, and generally speaking, if the bulk of your characters are teenagers, then your audience is generally going to be the same age as well. However, when it comes to things that are based on true crime, I feel like that kind of goes out of the window, and they do have wider appeal for older viewers. Or maybe I'm just speaking from my own experience. Generally, if protagonists are always teenagers, I don't gravitate towards those films, but if it's true crime, I do. Maybe I'm alone with that. But the point I want to make here is that it does seem like it's written for teenagers. It seems just not quite as gripping or as compelling as some other true crime-based films where we have teenage protagonists. It just doesn't seem as gritty, and it kind of seems like they've maybe toned it down a little bit, but also they are dealing with teenage issues, bullying and peer pressure and things like that. Obviously, they can exist in the adult world as well, but definitely when people are of school age. And I just feel like, while I do recommend it if you're an older viewer, I think it's one that will be more appealing to teenagers and perhaps people who are too young to see films that are with a higher certificate. That being said, I don't know what the certificate for this is. I don't know what a TV PG is. That's an American rating, I assume. But it has a 12 in the UK, so that gives you some information about how brutal or not it is. Whereas obviously the true crime aspect is very dark and honestly quite a very emotional story. That's not to say this is void of darkness or emotion, but it just wasn't as heavy going as I expected. The story is very, very slow as well. And I feel like that might actually be beneficial for the teenage audience or younger viewers, people who are maybe not used to watching darker, grittier, more violent films or documentaries based on true crime, because obviously they're usually for 18s plus. This one has a lot more of calmer moments in between the darker moments, and the darker moments are never as dark as I expected, again, based on the true story. So I guess the point there is that, yes, it's an interesting story about teenagers and this horrific crime, but it's not as compelling as the true crime story itself, or indeed many true crime-based fictional films, if that makes any sense, because it is definitely aimed at a younger audience. But I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think it deals with some really important topics. The fact that it's not as gritty or raw as I expected it to be will also mean that it's easier to watch for younger viewers as well. Again, I'm generalizing. There are plenty of young viewers who can handle things that are generally higher rated, but I think they took the right approach with it. Now, that being said, I don't know if they intended it to have a more teenage-focused audience, but for me, that's definitely the takeaway, and that meant that I didn't love it all of the way through. But we had some okay moments. The performances were good. The characters were not the most interesting either, but at the same time, they were fine. We have Kellie Martin playing Angela and Tori Spelling playing Stacy, and I don't want to say too much about the characters or what their involvement in the story is, but I thought the performances were good. The characters could have been developed a little bit more, but I think there are definitely some positive aspects to this. The narrative, when it's good, is very good. I think it's going to be quite relatable for a lot of young people watching it in that kind of situation, that high pressure, peer pressure, school environment. And there are moments of darkness. As I said, it wasn't quite as shocking as I expected it to be, given the serious nature of the crime. but at the same time, I think for the rating that it has, I think it delivers. Do I recommend it? Yes, I guess I do. It's not as compelling as I would have wanted it to be, but I think specifically if you're the target audience, that I think it could be quite a dark story with some really strong messages. For older viewers, it might not be as compelling, but also at the same time, if you're an older viewer and you like this kind of story, but you don't like things that are maybe more intense or darker or scarier, but you still want to experience the same narrative, this could be a good one to go with. So there's definitely an audience for it. It's not necessarily what I hoped it would be, but it's okay. The story is slow, but it works well enough. And the characters are, again, well enough written, but maybe not the most interesting. The performances are fine, camera work's fine. Absolutely no problems with anything there. Death of a Cheerleader may not have been as strong as I would have wanted, but I guess it works out fine. I think there is an audience for it, and in general, if it sounds like something that might appeal to you, then I'd say it's probably worth checking out.